Hello everyone, my name is Theodore Naiker from Spica Astrology, bringing astrology to life. And what I would like to do today is just make this short feature video discussing some of the topics related to the chart that is corresponding to the life of Donald Trump. As we all know, astrology is a representation of a pattern and a connection in space and time. It doesn't mean that one person fully embodies a chart, but it could also be the case that other people embody the chart as well. So while we should bear in mind that while I'm using an astrological chart, which I'm referring to as Donald Trump, the chart, in fact, is just static as a connection of time and space, and we are the ones that are attributing or projecting the life of a person, in this case Donald Trump, onto the astrological symbolism to derive some sort of meaning from it and make some correlations. In this video, I'm not going to be doing any predictive work because of the nature of the subject and the nature of the person and their status in society, at least for now. But I think from looking at what I will be talking about, you might get a sense of where things may be going if you're paying attention. If you're paying attention. So here we can see Donald Trump's chart, and if you can see my pointer, I hope. All right, so the birth details are 14th of June 1946 at 10:54 in the morning in Queens, New York City. Queens, New York, which is in the United States of America. So one of the first things I want to talk about is Panchanga, which you see up here. In Vedic astrology or Jyotish, we are first going to be looking at the Panchanga to understand what is the quality of time that the person is born in, because we've not only chosen a particular place to be born at on the earth, but we're also choosing a time. So something about this time should tell us details about the person's life in some way, and this is something that I guess is pretty unique to Jyotish, the analysis of time in various ways. So the first thing we're going to see here is the Karana, which is Bhava Karana over here, that is ruled by the sun. And I suppose there's more to say about Karana, but we'll just keep it simple. So the Karana Bhava is ruled by the sun. And so first of all, the person is going to be making some sort of individual material prosperity for themselves by their own efforts, by being seen, by being prominent in some way, having the Karana ruled by the sun. So obviously, the more strong the sun is in the natal chart, and the more linked it is with financial factors, and especially since it's the sun, the more the sun is linked with factors pertaining to being recognized or being famous, then obviously the potential of this particular kind of karana to yield material results is going to be enhanced. So you can see in Donald Trump's chart that the sun, by the way, this chart format is the East Indian chart format, which is what I prefer at the moment to use. It has Aries at the top here in the middle, and we proceed in a counterclockwise direction through the zodiac signs. So this would be Aries. There would be Sun and Rahu, or the North Node, in Taurus, Mercury in Gemini, Saturn and Venus in Cancer, Mars and the Ascendant in Leo, Jupiter in Virgo, retrograde. There's nothing in Libra, Ketu, or the South Node, and the Moon, debilitated in Scorpio, Sagittarius, the 5th house, Capricorn is here on the right in the middle. Above it is Aquarius, and finally this last triangular block here is Pisces. And in Vedic astrology, the preferred options are that the zodiac is not moving, it is not changing, but the houses are changing. So if someone was born with Pisces ascendant, let's say, the ascendant would just be marked up here in Pisces, but the chart would still remain the same. This is preferred in Vedic astrology because the sidereal zodiac is, for all intents and purposes, pretty fixed, relatively fixed, and so we would like to keep the zodiac fixed as a paradigm from that point of view, because in Jyotish, the sidereal zodiac occurs very far out into space, whereas the planets are having a much localized influence. And in fact, they are called graha, which means that they are eclipsing or seizing or blocking some kind of effect coming out from out there, being stellar based. All right, so back to Donald Trump's chart. We're going to talk about the sun and assess it in terms of ability to be seen, to be recognized, and what that means from a material manifestation point of view. Now, firstly, we see the sun is in an earth sign. It is in Taurus here, which immediately says to us that, right, this person, the potential to be making a lot of money is there. The sun is also, because okay, the earth and the earth sign is very much about material manifestation in that way, and when we're talking about karana. So the sun being in an earth sign, that is very much relevant. The sun being in a sign, an earth sign, that is the exaltation of the moon, that is also very important from a material manifestation point of view. Also, what you can see here, the sun is actually ruling the ascendant. In Vedic astrology or in Jyotish, the ascendant is what shows prominence and fame. Well, it shows fame, sorry. The 10th house shows prominence. And so here what you're seeing is the ruler of the ascendant, which is the sun, is placed in the 10th house of prominence. So they definitely are having a potential to be seen and to be prominent in public and have a prominent role in public. Having the sun in the 10th house is a very strong indication for that, besides the fact that it's an eclipse. All right. On top of that, you have the sun placed with the north node called Rahu in Jyotish. And in this system of astrology that I've studied, Rahu rules the sign of Aquarius, having the sort of global disruptive impact on the mind, being a fixed air sign, which can slow the mind down and create all sorts of mental apparitions and things like that. So Rahu being placed with the sun shows that part of this person's fame or prominence of personality is truly global, is involved in other countries, is kind of political in that way. So a personality that is public in that way is here, and from which there's a lot of material manifestation happening as well, because the sun rules the karana of the chart. And that's also important because Rahu rules the 10th sign from the sun, which is further, the sun being the ruler of the ascendant in the 10th house, conjoined a planet that is ruling the 10th house from the sun. This is very strong statement of prominence in society, whether for good or bad reasons, but they're being prominent in society. And having the sun ruling the ascendant shows that they are actually, they really care about that a lot as well. A lot of their focus and attention is there on that topic. Now, this is also, yes, it is a full moon chart. It is an eclipse, a lunar eclipse. What you will see is that the sun is also in the 7th house from the moon, and that is quite important from a other people point of view. The moon brings us into connection with other people. So this political combination, or at least maybe not political, but more about expanding one's personality, combination of the sun and Rahu, is occurring in the seventh sign from the moon. So that is also signifying that many connections with people of political nature, maybe they're having friends in a network that is quite political or elitist in some way, the rulers of society, that sort of thing happening. And other countries as well, having the nodal influence there. Okay, yes, it's a solar, I mean, it's an eclipse, so that would go without saying. The other thing that is important to note is that Aquarius, which is ruled by Rahu, is is the seventh house of the chart. So this is Leo down here. Aquarius is the seventh house, and that is ruled by Rahu. Well, one of the planets that rules it, one of the graha that rules it is Rahu, sitting with the sun, and that's important because Rahu is indicating sort of partnerships, partnership with the father. It's a day chart, so we can talk about the sun as the father here. And having the seventh house ruler having a conjunction with the sun can show some sort of partnership with the father. And again, because the sun is the Karana Lord, it is indicating this is materially manifesting in the person's life as gain. And that is true. A lot of his initial money was set up through trust funds from his father. Everyone knows that. It's also, plainly stated. This was set up quite early, I think, the late 60s, early 70s. This was set up for him and his siblings. You also can see that the maybe I should mention that the no, I'll come back to that later. So that's a very strong signification that there is fame, there's recognition, there's public office, there's connections with the movers and shakers of society. Even if he may not be political himself, but very strong from a influential personality into society and mingling with that sort of vibe. The other thing to mention here is that we've got, now moving into the chart a little bit more, I just wanted to give you an idea of how to use the Panchang, or how it's used in a very basic sort of way. The ascendant having Mars in it, that's also reflecting that having acquisition through the father is very important. You can see that the Varnada Lagna, which is up here, the second from that is Aries, all right, which is the ninth house of the chart, showing father. So making money through lineage or ancestry in that way is also coming to him because the Mars is ruling that ninth house is sitting on the ascendant. So he's probably famous for all the money and all the wealth of his family, all right, that's contributing to why he's being famous, being in the first house. But also Mars rules the fourth house as well, which is Scorpio. So part of that fame that he's got and prominence, the fame that he's, what he's known for, being the Mars and the ascendant, is yes, just the money coming from father, but also you see that the fourth house, which is properties, in particular the moon being debilitated in the fourth house, is showing, well, he's taken and become known for taking on properties that are debilitated, or properties that are abandoned, or properties that nobody else wants, and making something out of them. And in particular, you also have the association of Ketu, or the south node, which, the way I've learned, Ketu also rules the sign of Scorpio, and Ketu indicates high things, upwards direction. So Ketu being in the fourth house in its own sign is also showing, well, wow, that is bringing that moon out of its debility, is one of those conditions we call Neecha Bhanga in Jyotish, where a debilitated planet can be uplifted from its debilitated state through various factors. One of those, there are two ameliorating factors in this chart for that. One is the conjunction of Ketu with the moon, but also the conjunction of Mars in the ascendant. So Ketu is showing that in the fourth house, those debilitated properties indicated by the moon, we are making into big skyscrapers and luxury apartments and all those kind of things. Ketu being in its own sign of Scorpio, the external results are coming from Jupiter. And we see Jupiter sitting quite entrenched in his second house of the money that he's keeping, okay, or storing away. So a lot of um, finance is being made from and maintained by property. That's for sure, especially skyscrapers and things like that. And there's a huge list about, I think there's a whole string of hotel chains that he took over, renovated, refurbished, things like that. Quite famous for, I think. So that Mars in the ascendant is giving that sort of fame as well. Anything else I wanted to mention about that? Okay, so let's move on to talk about the moon. So the moon is very important in Jyotish because it tells you a lot about the subjective reality of the person, how they are perceiving life, because based upon that, we are doing things and making decisions. So the moon in Jyotish is an indicator of the state of the mind as a causal sort of form or a seed, and the nakshatra of the mind particularly tells us about the seed of the nature of the mind. From a psychological point of view, one can go into it a lot more. So I'll just give you an example of that here. You can see that the moon is in Scorpio, as we said, is debilitated. So in the fourth house, so besides some issues with home and the mother and things like that, the moon, because the fourth house in Jyotish is about the mother in particular. And you can see that the moon is in a nakshatra called Jyeshta. So you can see here, if I go here, moon 28 degrees of Scorpio, it's in the nakshatra called Jyeshta nakshatra. And Jyeshta nakshatra is at the very end of Scorpio in the sidereal zodiac, and it is ruled by a deity called Indra. Indra being the overlord of celestials in the heaven, and Indra being basically a king of gods, at an astral level or something like that. Indra also means lord of the senses, one who enjoys the sensual appetite to the maximum, or one who can, and therefore being a king and overlord of others as well, because he controls human beings through the senses, binding them in that way, or influencing their moods or motivations and actions in that way through the pull of the senses. So Indra, with the mind being saturated in that sort of seed, gives someone, shows someone who has a mentality of ambition, who has a mentality to not submit to anybody, but who wants to get at the top very quickly and stay there. And they will do a lot to keep their exalted position, because that in the mythologies that you read about Indra, or so-called mythologies that you read about this deity Indra, he does a lot of sometimes very questionable acts to maintain his seat of power. But it is the classical mindset that he who has the top, what is it, uneasy wears the crown or something like that. But that's basically kind of what we're looking at here. And so that sort of insecurity in the mind is manifest in the fourth house. So there's so many properties, huge skyscrapers all over the world, maybe as compensation, you could say, for that insecurity in the mind. Because the fourth house being inherently unstable is showing something inherently unstable in the root of the person's life, which I suppose is being compensated for by having these huge buildings everywhere. Fine. Whatever. We all do what we need to do to be at peace in life, and he's just found a way to do it in that way. The other thing we can say is that Venus becomes a very important planet in terms of him attaining to success and attaining those achievements and high status in society. That is promised from the considerations we've looked at from the Sun, just from the birth chart itself. We're not looking at the other charts. So the ruler of the Sun is Venus. So Venus occupies a very important place in this person's astrological makeup, because it is what is responsible for giving the Raja Yoga, or giving the sun the opportunity and environment to manifest and be recognized and have all of that wealth potential that we talked about. So Venus, you can see sitting in the 12th house. In Vedic astrology, the 12th house is about sexual pleasures. It is about bed comforts. It's about sleep. It's it's also about marriage, because ultimately a good marriage partner is someone you can sleep next to at night without feeling the need to always look over your shoulder, or without fear. So certain planets, when placed in the 12th house, can promise things like marriage. Venus is one of those planets for sure, or graha for sure. So Venus here, both naturally signifying marriage or relationships, um, and other ways, it can be seen in different ways as well, given the placement of Saturn in the chart. But essentially, Venus is showing the promise of relationships in general, as a natural significator of relationships. But also Venus here is ruling the 10th house, and specifically is ruling that power, that political recognition, making money from being seen combination in the 10th house with the sun. So through the moment, we could say that through marriage and through 12th house activities, um, which we don't need to go into details about, the person is making sort of money. But you also see the 12th house can also be charity and things like that. So, and he did make money from like beauty pageants, and it's a certain level of controlling nature, because the Saturn in Cancer is a strong modifier to that Venus. So the attitude towards women, the attitude towards partners, to partnership in general, very strong terms and conditions apply. We could say there's a sort of domineering aspect there, a controlling aspect that comes into the picture. You may call that dominatrix or whatever you want from a maybe sexual point of view, but we don't know that for sure. It's all allegedly. You also can see that Venus also rules the 12th house from the moon, because the moon is in Scorpio and its 12th sign is Libra. So Venus ruling the 12th sign from the moon, ruling the 7th sign from the moon, and being placed in the 12th house of the chart, very strongly shows someone, who can be subservient to women, but also at the same time, because of the Saturn influence on the Venus, also controlling of women as well. So it's kind of like a two-way street going on there, which I guess wouldn't surprise anybody given what the media has been saying. But there's something quite sensitive there about that Venus placement, especially with the Saturn in Cancer. All right. So moving on, what else would I like to say? Okay, so let's talk about the marriages, since that's what I brought up. So here you can see that, well, I said Venus, a planet in the 12th house in Jyotish, depending what graha it is, and depending on its associations, can promise something like marriage. So if we look at Venus periods, and actually I'm going to change this Vimshotri system here. Okay, there's Vimshotri Dasha, there's a modified Vimshotri, and there's the Narayana Dasha here. So basically, this timing system I'm going to use to see where his mind is at, what he's thinking about, what his focus is on, in life in terms of his well-being and what he wants to do from a desire kind of nature. And this one here, I want to see, well, what is he ending up doing eventually about it, with other people. And this one here is what I'm going to use to see, well, what is the timing of things happening to him from society, what is society giving him, what is the flow of that. And these are three things that basically happen all the time when we're looking at astrology and life in general. There's something we feel like, there's something we end up doing, and there's also something, a timing related to what society can give us. And for something like social status, social achievement, we have to also consider, well, what is the timing with the significations of society giving us something as well. So we look at all three of that. But for something like marriage, obviously it's a two-way street, so I'm not going to only look at where his mind's at, but I'm also wanting to look at, well, where is it actually happening. So I'm going to use this. The moon period you see here would be obviously very young for him to be married, and so would likely the Mars period. We don't know what relationships he was having in the early 60s, in his teenage years. So let's look at the next period, which is the Rahu period for him. And we would like to look at the Rahu-Venus period. And the Rahu-Venus period for him went from the end of 1975 to the end of 1978. So there's kind of a 3-year period there. And in that period is when he had his first marriage, actually. So you see the Venus activating a sub-period there, promising marriage. And he did marry in that period. He married... in 1977, he married a model by the name of Ivana, who bore him 3 children. Okay, so, all right. Then they were divorced in 1992 because Donald Trump was having an affair with a woman called Marla Maples, whom he met in 1989. So basically, for the whole of the Rahu period following that marriage, actually, he was basically with her. And things started to change in the Jupiter period, I'm assuming. But there's also something else going on here with the Venus activating not just marriage, all right? The Venus being in conjunction with Saturn is also sort of activating the Saturn every time. So every time there's a major formal relationship in Donald Trump's life as a marriage, specifically with the Venus being activated, there's also the Saturn coming into the picture. Besides the sexual exploits and things like that, which we can surmise or assume or conjecture about, from a real point of view, Saturn in Cancer can really be some sort of the psychology of control in order to maintain power and get power, or the person is receiving that. Basically, Saturn in Jyotish represents, my way of understanding it is that Saturn in Jyotish represents the working class people, represents the laborers. So the sign of Libra in Jyotish is not about theater and dance necessarily, that is Gemini and Mercury, but the sign of Libra is about financial exchange. It's the marketplace. That's where the scales are actually used. You don't find people using scales on a theater stage. So it's a bit of a strange thing in Western astrology that Libra is about dancing when it's symbolized by scales. But in Jyotish, it's strictly the scales as the marketplace. So bartering, exchanging goods and items. In a modern day context, this is where we're talking about tax and we're talking about business in that way, where people are involved, sales on a much larger scale, all right, where people and consumerism is happening as an exchange. Gemini is maybe the rooting and the stimulation of consumerist mentality and market brainwashing and things like that. But Libra is where all that is actually happening as an exchange. So it is also the big entertainment industry being ruled by Venus. The sign of Libra represents things like the sports industry because of at least team sports, because team sports and sportsmanship is a Venus attribute in Jyotish, because teams sit together, eat together, play together, win together, shower together, travel together. Okay, it's very much on a Venus vibe. So sportsmanship is a Venus attribute in Jyotish, whereas Mars is more kind of brutish and more strictly maybe good for being a big linebacker or something, where some individual force is necessary. but also maybe individual sports like wrestling, or well, Saturn would be involved there as well, but things like shot put or lance throwing, or something like that. Mars. But Venus is about sports, sportsmanship, and team sports. So Libra is also the a marketplace exchange of the huge entertainment industry, which involves movies, because Venus also represents videos and film industry in Jyotish, but also the sports industry complex as well. So it is where Saturn is exalted is in Libra, Libra being the marketplace, Libra being the consumerist exchange, Libra being the sports industry, the entertainment industry. This is all places where the common person, symbolized by Saturn, and the working class person, symbolized by Saturn, find some exaltation, find some relief from the hard labors of life. Okay, well, at least that is the way I understand it. So having yeah, so talking about Saturn again. So Saturn representing the common folk, the working class, being in the sign of the moon, gives it some, with the moon being debilitated, of course, in the fourth house, gives some sort of potential to be uplifted by the people, to be raised up because you are providing the common working class people with what they want to hear, what they want to eat, what they want basically for sustenance and to feel happy and peaceful with life. So Saturn in Cancer shows a mentality, gives a person a potential to be able to maybe manipulate the masses. This can be as non-threatening as being a fantastic actor on stage or a theater actor. Okay, you can see that also in some people's charts, but in the 12th house kind of way, with the moon being in the fourth, quite hidden, there's a lot of smoke screens that are indicated, okay, and things behind the scenes or hidden under the depths of things that are going on. So you could perhaps say that we are talking here about, well, mass manipulation and things like that. And in a manipulating Cancer sort of way, it means we're manipulating the communities that people are ascribing to or identifying as. So you may be playing one group of people against another group of people, so there's no sense of community or togetherness happening, but there's a sense of competition and separateness, separatist mentality coming through, by which control of the masses is happening. But at the same time, you are given the power through the masses because of that. So that is another kind of Raja Yoga or movement up in society. So you see both of them happening here. You have the one kind of Raja Yoga and movement into society, upward movement, social mobility, indicated by the sun in the 10th house with the North Node, ruling the 10th from the sun. And the ruler of all of that kind of social mobility is Venus, who is actually sitting together with Saturn, who is the other kind of social mobility potential here, which is a little bit more hidden, a little bit more manipulative, okay, and controlling. But essentially, his own personal upliftment through his own efforts is the Sun type, and the manipulation slash separatist mentality or the overly patriotic part of it being in Cancer, the natural fourth house, but also the people uplifting you, that is coming from the Saturn in Cancer. So the ruler of the sun is sitting with the ruler of his 7th house and the ruler of the 10th from his sun, which is Saturn, also involved with that Venus. So that Saturn-Venus combination in the 12th house is actually a huge power potential combination for him. So every time the Venus is activated from a marriage point of view, you'll find that he's getting into maybe some deals behind the scenes that we just don't know about yet, but that is giving him social power and access to the people and likability with the people. from a mass upliftment point of view. These are the two ways of having social upliftment, okay? One is through your own efforts, and one is by having the people put you up in that way. So, at the time of his first marriage, in this Rahu-Venus period, which I said here was 1975 to 1978, he was married in 1977, and that was actually around the same time. Following shortly after that, 1978, is when he launched his, for the first time, separated from his father's business, or the family business, and in 1978, he launched his first own independent Manhattan real estate business. Yes, which was largely funded by his father as well, or rather guaranteed by his father as well as a financial guarantee. But nevertheless, you see the coincidental nature of the Venus also giving marriage, but the Venus giving the Raja Yoga to the Sun, a social upliftment and independence, but also activating the Saturn, which is getting more involved with the people, or the deals behind doors kind of thing happening at the same time. Then he was having, I think, an affair with a model called, let me look at my notes here, Marla Maples, whom he met in 1989. So in the Jupiter period, he met this model, Marla Maples. And by the time 1990 came, they were having an affair while he was married, and he eventually married her. They formalized their relationship in 1992, and that was he was basically kind of forced out of fear. He said there was some rail accident in Manhattan in 1993, and then he had an existential crisis, and he felt like he had to marry her. That's how the story goes. We don't know. But you can see that in 1990 1992, he was in the second Venus period, the Jupiter-Venus period, all right? And that is when technically he wasn't married then, but for all intents and purposes, the 12th house activities were going on in that period while he was in his first marriage and while he was trying to wrap up his divorce in 1992 to the first wife. Now, around that time, what was happening with his money? Well, 1990, 1992, around that period, he was getting into, he made the Forbes millionaire list, he made the Forbes billionaire list, so his businesses were really taking off at the same time, coincidentally, at the time of the second marriage / affairs that were happening, that we know of, all right? So you can see how a lot of the power and financial sustainability is coming out of the 12th house, being both marriage in Jyotish as a source, but also being things behind doors. And then coincidentally, she was caught cheating with a bodyguard under a lifeguard stand on a deserted beach. I thought it was interesting because Pisces being the, Cancer being the crab and things like that, I thought having that Saturn, that deserted beach, Saturn Cancer vibe happening was kind of interesting to me in any case. So they separated in May 1997. So that marriage didn't even last the Jupiter period. Then he comes into the Saturn period itself. Now that is surely going to be a period where we can expect a very powerful marriage combination coming through, as well as a very powerful elevation from the people coming through. So in the Saturn period is actually when you can see in Saturn-Venus period, 2005, that is when he married Melania Trump. That is when their marriage, I think they married at the end of January 2005. You can see this period beginning in early February 2005, so maybe there's a time, 1 or 2 minutes off from the birth time, who knows. But you can see that is coincidentally happening then. And in 2005, he started, I think from a business point of view, things were really taking off. He was getting into, one of the main things that happened in 2005 to 2008 from people losing and you capitalizing on that point of view was the 2007-2008 financial crisis. And of course, Donald Trump used that opportunity to buy a lot more hotels and to especially buy a lot more golf courses. I think he went from owning 4 in 2007 to owning, I think, almost 10 or 11 by the end of 2009 or 2010. So you see that ability of their Saturn Cancer to capitalize on the loss that is happening to other people and to ensure its own survival in that kind of way. So that coincided with his marriage to Melania Trump. And this is a very big, powerful marriage, activating or trigger to his own financial and power success, because it is happening in the Saturn-Venus period, and it is Saturn-Venus together itself that is giving both the Venus giving the Raja Yoga of the Sun and Saturn being the Raja Yoga on its own, all right, of the Moon type, all right. And you can see that in this period is when he launched his presidential campaign and all that, with the Jupiter period coming through the Saturn-Jupiter period here. Now, I want to also comment on the other two timing systems that are here that I'm showing you. I just showed you now that every time he had a Venus period in this system, he was having a marriage and at the same time having huge financial success coming through, new deals and things like that. In the other periods, the financial success wasn't so stable, I would say. So the first marriage you can see, 1977, 1981. So really, the second marriage for him maybe was a little bit more of a marriage from his feeling point of view, because the moon was involved, all right? 1990 to 1990, when he was having the Moon-Venus period here, from a mental point of view, is when he was maybe also looking for a partner then, so, and Moon rules his 12th house of marriage, so he ended up marrying the person that he was having an affair with, and I think that's reflected very nicely here with all those affairs and things happening in the Moon-Venus period. Here, and Moon ruling his 12th house and the Venus being in the 12th house. So showing the focus of his mind was probably more on that with the second, with the Marla Maples, who gave him a daughter actually called Tiffany. So they separated in 1997. So you see in 1991, he personally goes into a Mars period, which obviously is very much about becoming famous and building up your brand and all of that, which we'll talk about just now. And then 1980 goes into a Rahu period. And it is in this period that he married Melania Trump, and also became a little bit more global in influence and having deals across other countries and maybe getting involved in those political shenanigans. Perhaps in 2013, 2014, you see the Rahu Sun period being active. Again, coincidentally following from a Venus period, all right. And around the same time, 2013, yeah, he's also in a Saturn Rahu period. So he's very much, and Saturn and the Cancer sign and the Taurus sign are very indelibly connected with each other by sign connections. So that's a permanent connection there as well as the Saturn and Venus being permanently connected to the Ketu and the Moon in Scorpio. Because one of the rules is that anything in immovable sign, all the movable signs are permanently connected to all the fixed signs except for the one next to it. Okay, so everything in Cancer is permanently connected to everything in Taurus, everything in Aquarius, and everything in Scorpio. And for him, all that Saturn-Venus connections to his 10th house Taurus, his 7th house Aquarius, and his 4th house of Scorpio, you can see that every time that 12th house became active by a marriage or some other kind of deal behind the scenes, it involved his 10th house career, political, it involved 7th house, again, marriage, relationship, partnership, it involved the 4th house, property, money, acquisition, all of that. So you can see how the Rashi Drishti is happening all the time, as there. It's just variably activated in a more obvious way with the mental dashas, the Uru dashas that are here. Okay, Then you can see 27, well, presidential campaign was obviously no surprise, and the win happening in a Saturn period because Saturn is giving him power of the people. But as we said, these two dashas or these two timing systems are basically showing us, well, where's his mind at? But we want to see, well, what is the world giving him? Because that will be the final kind of say, you know. And let's not forget that this Cancer sign is also very much connected with the moon. You know, the moon having the sign drishti, the sign really connection there very strong and permanently is giving a protection to that sign. Not only that, the sign of Cancer is also the ninth house from the moon, which is a kind of benediction and blessing coming through. So that the Saturn Venus combination as a Raja Yoga and also as a as a Raja Yoga is very, very, very powerful. And there are other reasons there as well. But that's pretty much what we're looking at there. Now, if we look at this Dasha system, you can see, well, this Saturn in Cancer is actually very, very strong in when it occurs, let's say, in prominent houses like the 11th house or the 10th house. Obviously, a Saturn Cancer combination like this occurring in the 10th house of a natal chart is going to obviously give a lot of extreme power from the people, all right, based on the fears of the people and things like that, playing those games. And if it's in the 11th house, you could say, well, you're manipulating for financial gain as well, all right, and other extreme sort of desires, which may not always be nice or good for you, but hey, that's what people do when they're playing on this level, I suppose. So he's born with it in the 12th house. So yes, from the 12th house kind of dealings and marriage, and relationship and all those things, he made a lot of his power and a lot of his status being sustained. There's another way to look at that 12th house before going into the Narayana Dasha, but you can also say the 12th house is, you know, giving charities to things. And we said Venus was sports, and Saturn in Jyotish is about muscle, is about endurance, because Saturn controls the air element in Jyotish, which is about disturbing things. It's not really about communicating per se, but it's about disturbing. And in a way, you can maybe look at communication as a kind of disturbance of the mind. Therefore, communication is happening as a ripple effect. But those are, you know, just philosophical theories about it. But essentially, Saturn is controlling the air element, which is giving the muscles in the body. In the construction of Jyotish, the sun rules the bones. Because it is out of the bones we get the blood, which is the moon. And that is showing the close connection, even at a core level, of the sun and the moon as giving life to us in that way. Whereas Saturn is the one who does all the work. Saturn is the laborer again. And so that's the muscles who are actually the parts of the body who are doing all the work all the time from an exertion point of view, okay? Expending energy point of view, breaking and tearing the muscles for them to grow is a sort of Capricorn process where Mars is exalted. So you're cutting the muscle fibers and then they're growing and becoming bigger, all right? So Mars is exalted in the sign of Capricorn. You know, these kind of things kind of just make logical sense in this system of astrology. So Saturn represents like bodybuilders and things like that. And Saturn also being an old man and being in the sign of Cancer, which is the natural fourth house, the sign of Cancer is very much about rejuvenating our energies and healthcare and cleanliness and things like that. Because that is what the moon is about. The moon is about healing, the moon is about nurturing, the moon is about providing sustenance to the body and the mind. So peace of the mind as well as nourishment of the body and health as well. So Saturn, being the old man, being placed in the sign of Cancer in the 12th house also indicates things like healthcare, hospitals, stuff like that, all right? And Venus, like I said, it's sports, but also police force and things like that. And these are all things that he's given charities to, because these are the two planets in his 12th house. The Trump Foundation has given charities to police, to servicemen, to health foundations, to sports foundations. So that's all very appropriate from in a positive way from the 12th house, besides also sponsoring beauty pageants and things like that, in a controlling kind of way. Um, there's many ways a house can manifest. So what else did I want to say about that? Yes, so let's go to the Mara Dasha. So when this Cancer sign becomes a 10th house, that is when, or even an 11th house, that is when we would really see that the society is giving that access of the power as well. So if we just skip along here, blah, blah, okay, we can see that he entered his Virgo period from 1980 to 1983. And that's quite important because Virgo, if from the sign of Virgo, which is down here where the Jupiter is, firstly, that's his second house, and he's got Jupiter there. So obviously he's making a lot of money in that period, but also at that time, relative to Virgo, the Saturn-Venus conjunction, the power-giving combination, and Venus controlling the Sun's Raja Yoga is in the 11th house therefrom. So we're not quite sure what deals he made, but we do know in that time, the early 1980s, the whole of the 1980s, he was just growing his money, and a lot of that came from the impetus and deals he was making at the turn of the 1980s. So that initial Virgo period was very crucial to that, setting up his financial sort of processes and administrations of the companies and things like that at that time. And then he goes into an Aquarius period, and we said Aquarius is very strong for him. It's angular from both the lights and also the ascendant. So that is a very strong sign as well. Then he had the Cancer period itself in his 40s and into his 50s. So we would definitely want to say that, okay, that is the time period of making those big moves to society, making those connections, those social connections, those political networking of the Sun Rahu, making some deals behind the scenes, making some agreements and things like that for power specifically. All right. And then Sagittarius, okay, we can skip that. Taurus, but okay, here's the Libra period. So he went into a Libra period from 2010 to 2019 is when it ends, June 2019. And relative to Libra, the Saturn-Venus combination of giving power is in the 10th house from Libra. So that for sure is showing power being given, prominence from the people being given. And, Venus also represents women. And people don't understand, well, how did these women vote for him given all his attitudes towards women, and his comments about women. And here you can see that Venus is sitting there with the Saturn, who's giving all the power. And Venus is controlling the Raja Yoga of the Sun. Venus rules the 10th house. Venus rules the 3rd house of being able to fight and convince people about things. So that is the nature of what happened, Venus being the 3rd house ruler sitting with Saturn in Cancer is showing that the words he's used has been powerful in that way. The domineering aspect came out very strongly, I guess, in the campaign. But you can see here that he's been in a Libra, very powerful giving period since 2010. And it's actually in that period that he's launched his presidential campaign and won, not surprisingly. You can see also that now he launched his campaign specifically in June 2015, so it was in the Libra Aquarius period. And again, that Aquarius sign that we kept saying that it's the 10th sign from the Sun, the ruler of Aquarius is the Saturn with the Venus who's giving power in the 12th house, and the other ruler of the Aquarius is the Rahu, who is sitting with the Sun in the 10th house, having a lot of power and influence there as well. So this sign of Aquarius is a big power sign for Donald Trump, I would say. Okay. And he won the election. Actually took place in Sagittarius period, which was his 5th house. Okay, so fifth house in Jyotish is about personal development and advancement. Okay, your willpower is sitting there, what you're thinking about a lot is sitting there, your ability to focus on your life and take ownership of your life is basically coming out of that fifth house kind of combination, which is the natural sign for Leo. Okay, in that way, it's how you take ownership of yourself and your life and advance things forward. And you can see he's in this power Libra period until 2019, where things move into Pisces. Now, all these deals are happening in the 12th house. And, well, what is having, there's besides the sign connections that we talked about, which are permanent, we want maybe if we wanted to see what was happening in the 12th house, well, then we'd want to see, well, which graha or planets are having a graha drishti, or a planetary connection on aspect that is symbolizing the desire to see onto that 12th house. And, well, actually, the only planet or graha that is having sight, desire sight onto that 12th house is the moon. Okay, and the moon is in Scorpio, and you can see, well, the Libras, so that's basically the only planet that can look into the 12th house actively to see what's going on, to see what's going on there. And you can see that that was his March 2017 to December 2017 period of Scorpio. So from the outside world point of view, which is what this chart is, this dynamic system is showing, the period of uncovering those things is basically over. All right, at least for now. We will still have to see what happens when it comes to other periods. But you can see a lot of the scandals and things with Stormy Daniels and all these things allegedly, come out and being exacerbated. I mean, that was basically a height or peak 2017 about having Trump marches and protest marches, and all of that basically did nothing. I think there were about 3 impeachment processes that were given through in 2017, and the last one was beaten by 364 to 50 or something. It was a terrible loss there in terms of the impeachment process as well. So now you'd say, why? Well, because even though the moon is the only one looking into the 12th house, and it's also ruling the 12th house, so it's going to protect the 12th house. The moon is looking in the 12th house to protect it. So it's and the moon is debilitated, so it will give some flavor of, well, scandal or sexual whatever shenanigans, and there will be sort of an emotional reaction about it, but it in the end strengthens the 12th house. So that's a bit strange and weird. Maybe the moon is not the one to be going to look into that in that way. And anyway, there's Necha Banga, so the Ketu is there holding the moon, and the Mars is also on the ascendant holding the moon very, very strong and keeping it very secure. That doesn't mean he has a stable mind, for sure. Moon with the Ketu is a very sensitive placement psychologically, but in a weird way, because of those insecurities, the person is overcompensating and creating all these deals and domination, especially with Mars rising, and Saturn being ruled by the moon also is showing that, as sort of closing the doors and closing the loose ends, almost paranoid about being caught or being seen or being, private. He's been going on a long time about Obama tapping the cameras and everyone looking at me. There's this obsession about tapes and recording and whatever, okay? But it's not something new. It's just been there all the time, having that Scorpio Ketu moon in the 4th house of the chart, okay, which is the heart of the chart in a way. And you can see it's going into a Pisces period, and that will be interesting. It is the 8th house and the 5th house from the moon and the 11th house from the sun. So I'm not really sure if there's going to be any kind of losses there, because those are fairly good houses from the sun and the moon, at least. It's problematic from the ascendant, but Jupiter has an aspect there, so maybe making more money. Maybe it becomes a more financial focus for him. I don't know, at least from the outside. He's in now a Mercury period. Well, we should probably mention Mercury, because that's also a very important planet for him. So Mercury in the chart is in Gemini, and Mercury is ruling the second house, and it's in the 11th house in its own sign. So Mercury is really indicating, because Mercury shows things like acting, theater. That's what Mercury indicates in Jyotish. And he's actually been, I think, a founding or board member of the Screen Actors Guild in the USA. And he receives a pension from that, which is huge, hundreds of thousands of dollars every year. We've only got the figures from 2015 and 2016 about it, when he did his last tax return. That was public, I suppose. But you can see that Mercury, the Screen Actors Guild in the 11th house, in its own sign, Gemini, which is about showing and acting and all that, is giving also the money, because Mercury rules the second house. Mercury also ruling the second house, being in its own sign in the 11th, also shows he's making a lot of money and gains actually from his brand, from his name, okay, because Mercury indicates the name that people call you by. So the moon is the mind, but Mercury is maybe all those names that the mind associates with. Moon is the mind, sorry, and Mercury is showing all those things and names that the mind is associating with, and the society associates you with. All right, so Mercury is controlling those things, and you can see that it's a hugely financial sort of contribution here as well. It's the Sri Lagna is there as well. It's yeah, it's quite a, but of course, Gulika is there, and there's also it's the 12th from the Saturn combination, and it's second from the Sun, and it's 8th from the Moon. So there's some issues there with the Mercury and the Moon combination not actually seeing each other so well, that maybe the speech and the voice and things like that is a little bit problematic, because the second house represents speech. Okay. And so he's in that Mercury period now, so maybe we'll have to see what happens with Mercury, but his Mercury is very strong, But perhaps in this Mercury Ketu period, there might be some issues that come up as he goes into the Pisces, and he loses that super strength of that, well, at least for now, as a temporary loss of the height or quantity of the strength of that Saturn Venus Raja Yoga that is coming. And he's going into he's still in a Jupiter period, okay? So a lot of astrologers were also saying, well, he went into a Jupiter period at the time of the election, and that's why he got into power. But actually, I think there was more to that than just saying he's in a Jupiter period, obviously. So that's kind of what I think. You see in the Dashamsha, the Jupiter is very, very strong in the Dashamsha chart, ruling the third house. But I think, being in the Jupiter period would, for him, I think it's mostly financial in nature. Jupiter ruling the 5th house and 8th house in the chart. But, we'll see what happens with that. And was there anything else I wanted to mention? Yeah, I think that's about it. Oh, I wanted to show you, just to compare another Saturn in Cancer person. I've looked at about 100 or so charts of people that have Saturn in Cancer. Not all of them have this kind of power, because sometimes the Saturn is combust, or the moon is not well placed from the moon, so things like that, and the Sun is not so powerful, or the Karuna is not favorable to it, things like that. But just to compare, a very sort of illustrative example is the chart of Adolf Hitler, and you'll see here that this is the chart for Adolf Hitler, 20th of April 1889, 1831 in the evening, in Branau am in Austria, sorry. And you can see here that, just to keep it quite brief, the Saturn in Cancer giving Raja Yoga of the people, to the struggle of the people, because of the issues that people are having, all right, because of taking advantage of a situation in society, playing groups of people against each other. See, the same themes are there with Saturn in Cancer, all right? But it's even more powerful in Adolf Hitler's case, because it is the 10th house also from the natal ascendant. Whereas for Donald Trump, it was in the 12th house. So I guess maybe Donald Trump's case is hidden. Okay, maybe it should stay hidden. I don't know. Everyone's trying to uncover things, but because Saturn is with Venus in Donald Trump's chart, everyone's talking about Donald Trump, but no one's really talking about his wife. What is going on there? Uh, it's kind of strange to me how someone would stay with Donald Trump for such a long time, but maybe she's a good mother and things like that. I don't really know her. I haven't really researched her, so that's also just speculation. It has no merit to it. But there's obviously other things going on with that Venus in Donald Trump's case in the 12th house. But in Adolf Hitler's case, there's nothing obstructing that Saturn. There's no terms and conditions with that Saturn. Okay. It is in the 8th house from the moon. Again, we have someone who has moon with Ketu combination. All right. And so sensitive moon placement, the mind placement. Okay. But you can see that Saturn being in the 10th house in the birth chart itself is showing that this is most probably, like, it's obvious, it's external, and it's probably also kind of global in effect, because it's angular from the sun, it's the fourth from the sun, so it's quite powerful, this combination here as well. And he's also born on a Saturday, so he has a lot of energy to sort of implement it. Okay, and what I wanted to say here. Oh yeah, so let's look at Adolf Hitler's external sort of world timing system. You can see obviously, so when this now, it's already in the 10th house, it's already very powerful as a combination there, Mein Kampf and my struggle, and connecting to the crisis in Germany, the financial crisis, and taking advantage of that, and getting a whole lot of public sponsorships from these big industrial companies, chemical companies, machine companies, military weapons manufacturers. All that is indicated there as well by that Saturn. I think. I think it could be in another way, but that's kind of what I think about it, because Saturn eventually is also controlling the Mars, who's ruling the second house of money. So, and also that's the speech, second house is the speech, and Saturn having a final say about the speech in his case is showing that sense of power and influence coming through the voice as well, very strong. So anyway, you can see that, so obviously when by the timing system, when Saturn comes into the 11th house, we're going to see that Saturn power giving ability very, very strong. And in 1930, let me just move some things around here, just so it's easier to see. Okay, so you can see that Adolf Hitler went into a Virgo period from 1934 to 1939. And that is when that Saturn combination was in the 11th house relative to Virgo. So he had huge, that 1934 was when he was made Chancellor of Germany, basically, and basically started making all the bucks and all the money streaming in and sponsorships. And although they also started in early 1930s as well, but it became quite major at this time in 1930, in the mid to late 1930s. And in 1939, when he went into the all-important Libra period, which makes the Saturn even more prominent by being in the 10th house anyway, that is when he was made Führer, like overall totalitarian dictator of Germany, and he had this unquestionable power that was given to him from the people. So it's kind of there, and coincidentally, it's quite interesting that this Libra period of that maximum power coincidentally lines up with the years of the start and end of World War II, at least in Europe, 1939 to 1945. Okay, so you can see that the power of this of Saturn in Cancer as a feature of these charts is there. I just wanted to show you Adolf Hitler's chart as as a comparative example, because it's just and I'm just looking at the birth chart and looking at dashas and timing, just to get a sense of, well, looking at the same dynamics that are at play. In Hitler's case, it was very prominent because it was in the 10th house natally, but in Donald Trump's case, it's perhaps not so obvious because it is in the 12th house, and the moon is kind of keeping it protected in the 12th house. That's what I would say. But maybe now we might see something different happening, because by transit, you're going to have, if I can just move it to here, this is his chart again, and let me just put the transit chart on the outside. Okay, so right now Jupiter is in sidereal Libra. So maybe when Jupiter goes into sidereal Scorpio, there may be a chance to see some of that activity of the 12th house that we're all trying to get a handle on. And that would basically happen in October this year. I think 11th or 12th of October, Jupiter goes into sidereal Scorpio. Okay, so by transit, the Jupiter for a year from October 2018 to October 2019 will be sitting on that Ketu and Moon combination, and also having an aspect onto his 12th house. So that could be a year where we can potentially see some things maybe coming to light, being unraveled. Jupiter typically will support things that are truthful and tend to maybe show up things that are not. So we will just have to see, but that's kind of my feeling about it, which I can also be very, very wrong. So anyway, hope you've enjoyed this little feature video of Jyotish and practicing it, to show you kind of some of the basics of what I know, and I'm still learning and have a long way to go. I haven't discussed Navamsha and other charts because I'm also still learning how to work with those properly. But at least with the birth chart itself, the D1 chart on its own, I hope you got a sense of how Jyotish works, and you can see it can be quite specific, especially in the strength of Jyotish is in the timing systems, which are very, very, if you know how you use them, it's very interesting to just go and look how coincidentally that one Libra period for Adolf Hitler coincided exactly with the years of World War II in Europe. I thought that was very spectacular to just see from an astrological point of view. So hope you found this helpful and informative and entertaining at least. I know I'm not a very entertaining sort of presenter. I'm not like laughing and giggling all the time or making jokes, but I just wanted to give you a sense of what Jyotish kind of looks like, and maybe discuss Donald Trump's chart in ways that you may not have heard of yet. All right, so thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye.